So one of the main questions that I see, and obviously I get asked quite a lot, is how do I know when to let a dog off if they're not your dogs and you're a professional dog walker? Like, if you're bringing them out into an open space or into the malls, how do you know which ones to let off or when to let them off? And obviously you've got to do this in stages. You've got to vet your dogs properly and do checks. This is why you should have some sort of 2-week trial with them in place to see if the dog's suitable. But one thing I always look for is if they do this. You know, if they just have the ability to hover around you when you just stood still, or if you're walking, they do tend to just follow around. You know, they're always close by. They're not just forming off into the distance. Some dogs do that, and some dogs have got brilliant recall, and it's just something that you've got to manage. Like, I have a few dogs that like to go in the distance, but they're constantly coming back between us, back and forth, and that sort of thing I'll accept. So how do I do this in stages? So obviously we'll start with a short line, 2 or 3 meters. See how they're getting on, see if they're connecting, see if they're actually paying attention when they're actually close to me. Next, we'll increase that distance, we'll increase the long line, we'll let them have a 10-meter long line, and we'll see how we go. If they're constantly at the end of, you all right there? If they're constantly at the end of the line, and they're always pulling to get to the next thing, or they're just not paying attention to you whatsoever, it's not time to let that dog off in that place, because you haven't got control, there's no connection between you and the dogs. You want the dogs, even when on a 10-meter long line, just to be around you, within that area, within that space. It could require a little bit of training from you and the owners, but yeah, long line. And if they're participating, if they're paying attention, they're rolling around you, you know what I mean, they're not going too far. You have some engagement, you can recall them on a 10-meter long line or whatever. My next step from that would be to let that long line trail when you're confident that they are paying attention, they are recalling, they're engaging. Once you've done this, the long line's trailing, and after a couple of sessions of doing this, I would then decide to let them off a long line. And then hopefully you can have behaviours, you know, similar to this, where the dogs just hover around and they pay attention. Do you know what I mean? Because if we were here and I had one up there and his recall were absolutely piss poor and he weren't paying attention whatsoever, it'd be a really dangerous situation, because if anything popped up over there, he'd be off after it and you'd have no control. So that's the way I go about it. I do it in stages. I start with a short line, a little bit longer line, then a nice long line, then we let the long line trail, and then freedom. To be honest with you, sometimes when you get dogs, I've done this long enough now to understand that when I get a dog that is just engaging, playful and stuff like that, great off lead, there are sometimes where I have a dog off lead fully within the first session, because sometimes they're just that way out. Sometimes you have a dog that engages, it likes the human interaction. And not only this is something that I do practice with the dogs that I take on, it's also something I did with all of my dogs, you know, growing up and training them. So these are all sorts of things that I do, but that is how I go about letting somebody else's dog off when we're in an open space. What are you doing? Dipsticks. Are you? Come on. Come on. Come on. What are you doing? What are you doing?